I've painted quite a bit of Rohan in the past year or so, and I love adding painted details on to give them that extra oomph on the tabletop. So I thought I would break down my top 3 in this video today. First up are the metals on the swords. Straight away, for added interest, I like to add a copper or gold hilt, obviously depending on the sword, as this will break up and distinguish this section to the blade. And it's a super simple detail to add. For the blade itself, I have a new favourite silver paint from the Army Painter range, and that is Cobalt Metal. It's a cooler looking silver with the slightest of tint of blue in there, and it's a great colour to use on armour as well. And I'm going to follow that up by using a blue tone from the Fnatic range. Please note that this wash is much weaker than the previous blue tone paint that we had before. However, it's great for altering the colour of the blade slightly. Whilst the hilt had a strong skin tone applied to make the shaded areas a smidge darker. And now, this bluish steel blade looks pretty good, shiny and new. However, too clean for this Rohirrim warrior. He's heading into battle. So a further dark tone was added to the blade, but focusing more towards the bottom half of the sword. This will not only darken it down slightly, but it will allow the highlights next to really stand out. On to my favourite metallic paint, and an absolute gem in my collection, is this true brass colour. It's absolutely perfect for highlighting anything metallic that's not silver. So brass, gold, bronze, copper, that sort of thing. Now onto the blade, and we've got this super shiny metallic paint. Thorin, what's it called?
Mithril.
Like our true brass colour, you don't need much of this at all. A thin highlight to pick out the edges of the sword, and straight down the middle using the edge of the brush is spot on for the blade. However, this Rohirrim warrior will be defending his lands against those dirty hill tribesmen, and his sword needs to look a bit used and scuffed. I'm going to exaggerate this by painting on some thin, faint lines to represent this. Here I'm using a fine-tipped character brush from Army Painter to help with this. It's a very simple detail that I add to all of my troops these days, but give it a go next time you want to try a different style blade or armour. Number 2, the mighty Rohirrim throwing spear, where I can't even hit a single model from 2 inches away in a game. Damn you dice gods! The spear tip was painted in the same manner as the sword blade previously, and then a mocha skin paint was used to lay down the light brown base colour. For these spears, I'm going to go for a painted on wood grain effect. It's something that I like to do on miniatures these days, and it's pretty simple to do. And it just makes basic weapons look a bit more interesting. To achieve this, a second lighter paint, this time 𝐷𝐶𝐒, was used to paint a series of thin, short lines. I try not to make them too uniform, but do the scattered approach. And some of them have a bit of a wave to make them look irregular. However, if you fancy doing a bit more and giving it extra detail, then skip the 𝐷𝐶𝐒 colour, and jump straight onto a light tone wash, and smother your wood. I'm using the wash here to alter the colour of the base coat that we've got going on. And don't be afraid to let it pool a bit so it's darker in some places, like on the bottom here, as this will give a bit of variation to the overall base coat. Back to our character brush again for the remainder of the spear, as we will paint on a series of thin lines. But this time going with a darker brown colour of Rhinox hide by Games Workshop. And now we are giving the wood some contrast between the light and the dark to make it more visually striking. You can even have a bit of fun with it and add some oval shapes here and there to make it more interesting and wood-like. Lastly, I pushed the contrast even more and added a second series of lines, but this time went much brighter, using this skeleton bone paint. Doing this on all of your troops will take a while, but for me it's worth it, as it just adds an extra element to the miniature. Fun fact, I got this idea from my Ashwood snooker cue, as it had a nice pattern to it. And just like my throwing spears in the game, my snooker cue missed a lot as well. I'm starting to think maybe it's the user? Ugh, standard. I did the same technique for the other weapons in the army, just like this axe and bow. Detail number 3, a halved shield design. With shields being prevalent in the game, as there are nasty arrows and swords attacking you from every direction, we need our warriors to be well defended. And with the Rohan shields already sculpted with some nice added design detail, let's add some extra painted detail to make it really stand out. A quick tip here is that if you slightly want to alter the colour of a layer, for example I want the red and green to be darker, then you could use speed paint to go over the top of it. It will go into the recesses to create some shading, but also the thin layer on top of the existing paint will alter the colour underneath, giving you more options to paint with. And I'm just trying to match this to the airbrush shield that I did previously, as you can see here. And next up was to darken down the lower part of the shield and make a darker looking gradient, as I'll be applying lighter colours for the highlights and the symbol. So the darker tones here will lift the details out more later. And I used a hairdryer on a low setting to speed things up. The boss of the shield was picked out with some metallic colours of silver and copper, although gold would be pretty cool as well for your characters. Don't worry about being too tidy, and if you get any onto the shield design, it doesn't matter, as this will be covered up on the next stage. Any kind of light cream or grey from your collection will do here, but do use your fine tip brush for this part, especially on a fiddly shield design. Whilst I'm doing that, in the meantime, I'd like to thank my YouTube members and Patreon supporters. It's because of your wonderful support that I can make videos that everyone likes to watch on the channel. And if you would like to join our fellowship, then check out the info in the description below. Or feel free to give the video a thumbs up if you like these tips. Okie dokie, back to the shield. After laying down the base coat for the emblem, I mixed up some runic grey speed paint with some medium. And this very thin layer of paint created a light bluish tint of shade. I focused this more towards the boss of the shield here, whilst the larger emblems had it placed more towards the bottom. Once this paint had completely dried, I thinned down our original base coat of Great Hall Grey, and then applied it where the base coat and the blue tint meet to help with the transition further and smooth it out. I even added some thin lines of brain matter beige to create some scuffs and scratches to this area. Because if he is not going to take down his enemy with a throwing spear, then hand-to-hand combat it is. Oh, come on! The final part was to highlight the shield itself. A little tip here, when highlighting objects with edges like this, I like to use the side of my brush rather than the tip. I find you get a better highlighting line, and it's more precise to pick out. Implementing these tips on some warriors does take a little bit of time, however, I do really like the end result. So, what's your favourite details tip out of the 3 today? And what other details would you think of adding for your troops? Until the next time, keep on hobbying.